After years of abuse, I disappeared, then watched my ex beg on national TV. The words had been playing on repeat in my mind for the past 3 hours as I sat in this anonymous hotel room, the glow of the television the only light cutting through the darkness. My hands trembled slightly around the remote control, thumb hovering over the rewind button for what must have been the 20th time tonight. Part of me still couldn't believe what I was seeing, even though I had meticulously orchestrated every moment of it. The familiar weight in my chest felt different now, lighter somehow. For 6 years, that heaviness had been crushing, suffocating, a constant companion I couldn't shake. The weight of his words, the weight of his fists, the weight of pretending everything was fine when nothing had been fine for so long I'd forgotten what fine even felt like. I pressed rewind again. Watched the tears stream backward up his face, his professionally powdered skin glistening under studio lights. The talk show host's expression of practiced concern reversed into neutral expectation. Then I hit play, and the scene unfolded once more. "If you're watching this, please come home." His voice broke in exactly the right places. The camera zoomed in, capturing the perfect quiver of his bottom lip. "I've changed. I've gotten help. Whatever I did to make you leave—" A laugh escaped me, sharp and bitter like breaking glass. Whatever he did? The catalog of his crimes against me would take the full hour-long show to enumerate, not the tidy 5-minute segment they'd allotted him between celebrity gossip and cooking demonstrations. My ribs ached with phantom pain, a body memory from the time he'd cracked 2 of them because dinner was cold. My cheek tingled where it had once split open against our bathroom sink. An accident, he'd told the ER nurse while standing close enough that his fingertips brushed against my lower back. A warning, not a comfort. 3 months ago, I wouldn't have believed this moment possible. 3 months ago, I was still flinching at the sound of keys in the door, still measuring my words with scientific precision, still carving myself into smaller and smaller pieces to avoid setting him off. But that was before the pregnancy test. I wasn't showing yet when I left. Wouldn't be showing for weeks. But that little plastic window with its 2 pink lines had been the lightning bolt I needed. Not for me, never just for me, but for the possibility growing inside me. A life I would not allow to shrink and cower the way mine had. I set the remote down and placed both hands on my still flat stomach. The bump would come soon enough. By then, I would be thousands of miles away from this mid-range hotel just outside his search radius. By then, I would have a new name, new papers, new beginning. All of it arranged during the months I'd been secretly planning, siphoning away money in increments too small to notice, documenting every bruise and banking every threat in encrypted files now in the hands of 3 separate attorneys. The TV host was leaning forward now, her expression a masterclass in compassionate journalism. "And you have no idea why she left? No warning signs?" His face, that handsome face that had once made my heart race for entirely different reasons, crumpled with precisely calibrated grief. None. Everything was perfect. We were happy. I came home from a business trip and she was just gone. The business trip. 3 days I'd needed, and he had handed them to me on a silver platter. 3 days to execute what I'd been planning for nearly a year. The moment he'd pulled out of our driveway, I'd pulled the pre-packed suitcase from the crawl space above the garage. Every move after that had been plotted with chess players' precision. The cash withdrawal just under the reporting threshold. The burner phone. The reservation made months in advance under a name that wasn't mine. I knew he would do this. The public plea, the tears, the bewilderment. I knew because controlling men can't stand losing control. I knew because in 6 years, I'd become an expert in predicting his every move while he never bothered to truly see me at all. What he didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was that I'd been preparing evidence against him for months. Every accident documented, every threat recorded, every financial maneuver tracked. While he slept beside me, I had been building the case that would destroy him. And this television appearance? This crocodile tear performance? It was the linchpin in my carefully constructed plan. I hadn't just disappeared to escape. I had disappeared to watch him expose himself on national television, to let him publicly weave the rope for his own hanging. The segment was ending now. The host was promising to keep viewers updated on this heartbreaking story. A helpline number scrolled across the screen for anyone with information about my whereabouts. Information that would lead, not to a reunion, but to the systematic dismantling of the life he had built on lies, intimidation, and my silence. Tomorrow, the first package would arrive at the network. Photographs, medical records, audio files. Tomorrow, his performance would be recontextualized as what it truly was, the desperate flailing of an abuser who had lost his victim. Tomorrow, the same network so eager to broadcast his search would be even more eager to break the story of who he really was. My attorney would be releasing similar packages to 3 other networks, 2 newspapers, and a podcast with a rabid following and a specialty in domestic abuse cases. The documents would also find their way to his employer, whose zero-tolerance policy on domestic violence had been implemented just last year after a very public scandal. How convenient. I switched off the television, plunging the room into darkness. For the first time in years, the darkness didn't frighten me. It enveloped me, protected me, the same way I would protect the life now growing inside me. Sleep wouldn't come easily tonight, too much adrenaline, too much anticipation. But that was okay. I had survived sleepless nights before, nights spent rigid with fear, calculating escape routes and managing breaths to stay silent. This sleepless night was different. This one was mine. This one was victory. Morning came with the harsh buzz of my new phone's alarm. I hadn't slept much, but wakefulness brought no fatigue, only a sharp, clear certainty. Today was the day the first domino would fall. My hand drifted automatically to my stomach as I sat up. A habit already, this protective gesture toward a child still more concept than reality. I showered and dressed methodically, each motion deliberate. The clothes were new, purchased with cash at a department store 2 states away. Nothing he would recognize, nothing he had touched. The woman in the mirror looked both strange and familiar, my face but freer somehow. I'd cut my hair short the day after leaving, dyed it a shade darker. Small changes, but enough to create moments of hesitation in anyone who might be looking for me. The breakfast provided by the hotel sat untouched. My stomach was too knotted with anticipation to accommodate food. Instead, I sipped water and checked my burner phone. No messages yet, but it was still early. By noon, the first package would have reached the network. By evening, the story would be breaking. By tomorrow, his world would be collapsing with the same sickening velocity mine had the first time he'd struck me. I remembered that moment with perfect clarity. The shock of it, the denial, the way my mind had scrambled to reinterpret what had just happened, to find an explanation that wasn't the obvious one. He had been stressed. I had pushed him. It was just this once. It was never just once. The pattern had established itself with textbook precision. Tension building, explosion, remorse, reconciliation, repeat. A cycle as predictable as seasons, as destructive as hurricanes. And like someone living in the path of recurring storms, I had learned to read the signs, to board up my emotional windows, to find the eye of the hurricane and make myself small within it. Until the pregnancy test, I gathered my few belongings. Traveling light was another survival skill, and checked out of the hotel. The woman at the front desk smiled blandly, her eyes never really focusing on my face. Perfect. Forgettable was exactly what I needed to be. Weather's turning, she remarked as she processed my card. They're saying rain by this afternoon. I nodded, taking the receipt without comment. Weather was the last thing on my mind. My attention was fixed on the clock behind her. 9:17 a.m. The package would be delivered by courier at 11:30 a.m. Precisely timed to arrive during the production meeting for tomorrow's show. My research had been thorough. The rental car, also arranged months ago through a chain that required minimal identification, hummed to life beneath me. I drove aimlessly for an hour, careful to maintain perfectly legal speed, signaling every turn with unnecessary precision. Being forgettable meant being unremarkable in every way. At 11:45, I parked in the lot of a chain coffee shop with free Wi-Fi, ordered a drink I didn't want, sat at a corner table with my back to the wall, and opened the laptop I'd purchased with cash 3 states away. The VPN activated automatically. Another layer of protection in an already elaborate security system. No news yet, of course. Too soon. But my attorney would confirm receipt within the hour. Until then, I waited, sipping occasionally at a cooling drink, maintaining the appearance of normality while my heart performed gymnastics behind my ribs. The email arrived at 12:23 p.m. 2 words. Package delivered. Something inside me uncoiled slightly. The first step completed. Now came the waiting. I closed the laptop, gathered my things, and returned to the car. The sky had darkened with approaching rain, just as the clerk had predicted. I welcomed it. There was something appropriate about storms breaking today of all days. My next destination was another hotel, this one 2 hours away. Another anonymously comfortable room where I would watch his downfall unfold on cable news. Another temporary shelter on my way to the life I was building far from his reach. The rain started as I merged onto the highway, fat drops splattering against the windshield. I turned the wipers on and felt a smile spread across my face, my first genuine smile in longer than I could remember. There was something about watching the world wash clean that felt right today. By the time I checked into the new hotel, the storm had passed and breaking news alerts were lighting up my phone. It had begun. Faster than I'd expected, but news organizations moved quickly when there was blood in the water. And I had given them blood, evidence so compelling, so undeniable that even the most skeptical producer would see the story's value. I turned on the TV just in time to see his face appear on screen. Not tearful now. Angry. Defensive. The chyron beneath him read, "Breaking. National search turns to scandal as allegations surface." They were being careful with their wording. Allegations and claims peppered the anchor's speech. But the damage was already happening. The split screen showed his workplace issuing a statement about taking the matter extremely seriously and placing him on administrative leave pending investigation. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my attorney. Additional packages delivered. Prepare for escalation. Escalation. The word sent a shiver of something between fear and exhilaration through me. This was what I had planned for, what I had meticulously orchestrated. Yet watching it unfold brought complicated emotions. Not regret, never that, but a strange sort of grief for everything that might have been if he had been the man he pretended to be to the rest of the world. I ordered room service, suddenly ravenous. As I waited for the food to arrive, I flipped between news channels. He was everywhere. The story was spreading like wildfire, each outlet adding their own angle. One had interviewed a former colleague who always had suspicions. Another had dug up police reports of disturbance calls to our address, calls I had always convinced the responding officers were misunderstandings. The food arrived just as my phone rang. My attorney again, this time actually calling rather than texting. I answered with my new name, still strange on my tongue. "It's moving faster than anticipated," she said without preamble. "His employer has terminated him. The police department has reopened investigation into the incident from last year, and I've received 3 interview requests for you." "No interviews," I said immediately. "Not yet." "Agreed, but at some point your voice will need to be part of this narrative, when I'm ready and safe." "Of course." A pause. "He's trying to locate you, using private channels now that the public one has backfired." I had expected this. "He won't succeed." "No, he won't." The confidence in her voice was reassuring. "But I want you to move again tomorrow. Different direction this time. The arrangements have been made." We discussed logistics briefly before ending the call. I ate mechanically, my attention fixed on the television where his life was unraveling segment by segment. The narrative had fully shifted. The search for the missing wife had become the exposure of the abusive husband. His tears on yesterday's broadcast were being reanalyzed as manipulation rather than grief, and it was only beginning. By morning, 2 women from his past had come forward with similar stories. By afternoon, his name was trending on social media. By evening, the talk show that had hosted his tearful plea had issued a formal apology for enabling potential further trauma and had devoted their entire hour to domestic violence experts. I moved hotels as instructed, traveling south instead of north this time. The new room was identical to the previous 2, bland, clean, anonymous. Perfect. I was living in transitional spaces as I myself transitioned from victim to victor, from hunted to hunter. My phone rang again as I was settling in. Not my attorney this time. The detective who had taken my statement last year, the one who had looked at my bruises and suggested I might have misinterpreted the situation. His voice was very different now, respectful. "Apologetic? We're reopening the case," he said. "The evidence you've provided through your attorney is substantial." "Yes," I replied simply. "It is." "We'll need a formal statement." "My attorney will arrange it. When I'm ready." He didn't push. That was new. "Of course, and I want to apologize for not doing your job." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't soften them with an apology. Those days were over. The silence stretched between us. "Yes," he finally said, "for not doing my job." After he hung up, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, suddenly exhausted. 3 days since I had watched him beg for my return on national television. 3 days of calculated destruction. The adrenaline that had carried me through was ebbing, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. I placed both hands on my stomach. "We're doing it," I whispered to the life inside me. "We're getting free." Sleep came easily that night, deep and dreamless. I woke to sunlight streaming through poorly closed curtains and more news alerts on my phone. His family had issued a statement distancing themselves. The private investigator he had hired had withdrawn his services, citing ethical concerns about the case. 3 sponsors had pulled their support from his company's major projects. It was happening even faster than I had anticipated. 6 years of secrets exposed in 3 days of strategic revelation. 6 years of injuries and insults being analyzed by people who had once smiled at us at dinner parties, accepted our wedding gifts, asked when we were starting a family. The thought twisted something in my chest. Would these same people have stepped in if they'd known? Would anyone have helped if I'd asked? Questions without answers and ultimately meaningless now. I was helping myself. Finally, my attorney called mid-morning. "He's requesting a meeting." The words hit like a physical blow. Absolutely not. Of course not in person. Through attorneys only. I took a deep breath. What does he want? To make a deal. He's offering financial settlement in exchange for your public statement that the evidence has been misinterpreted. A laugh escaped me, harsh and humorless. "No." That was my response as well, but I wanted you to know. He's desperate. Good. The word tasted strange on my tongue. Not sweet, as I had imagined, but not bitter either. Just final. "There's something else," she continued. "The district attorney is considering criminal charges based on the evidence and the reopened police investigation. They may need your testimony." Testimony. Court. Him in the same room, watching me with those eyes that could shift from rage to tenderness so quickly, it gave me emotional whiplash. The thought made my skin crawl. "I can't be in the same room with him," I said, hating the tremor that had crept into my voice. "There are alternatives. Video testimony. Screens. We'll explore all options if it comes to that." If. A small word carrying enormous weight. "Let's wait and see," I said finally. One step at a time. After we hung up, I stood by the window, looking out at the unfamiliar city skyline. One step at a time had been my mantra through all of this. Plan meticulously. Execute precisely. No rushing, no panicking, no impulsive moves. The strategy had worked so far. The next 2 days passed in similar fashion. News updates. Calls with my attorney. Movement from one anonymous hotel to another. His fall from grace continued its spectacular trajectory. Former friends giving interviews about signs they missed, professional associates expressing shock and dismay, his carefully constructed public image disintegrating under the weight of evidence I had painstakingly collected. On the 6th day after his television appearance, I received the news I had been waiting for. Criminal charges had been filed, an arrest warrant issued. My attorney forwarded the press release from the district attorney's office, its formal language nonetheless thrilling. Following extensive investigation and review of compelling evidence. I watched the coverage of his surrender to authorities on my hotel television. The perp walk, the flash of cameras, his face set in an expression I knew well, the tightly controlled mask that hid volcanic rage beneath. I knew what happened when that mask slipped. The knowledge made me press a protective hand to my stomach again. The prosecutor made a brief statement on the courthouse steps. Standard language about taking domestic violence seriously, about holding abusers accountable regardless of their status or public image. What wasn't standard was the detail she included, specifics from my medical records, timestamps from recordings, patterns of escalation documented over years. My evidence, presented now as the foundation of the state's case against him. That night, I allowed myself a small celebration, a proper meal delivered to my room. A non-alcoholic sparkling cider in a plastic hotel cup, a long bath in the mediocre tub, small luxuries that felt enormous after months of planning and days of execution. As I soaked in tepid water that smelled faintly of industrial cleaner, I let myself think about the future for the first time in years. Not just the next step in my escape plan, but genuine future. Where I might live, what I might do. Who I might become now that I was no longer defined by survival. The thought brought unexpected tears. I had been so focused on getting out, on bringing him to justice, that I had barely considered what came after. Freedom stretched before me, exhilarating and terrifying in its vastness. "We have options now," I whispered to my still flat stomach. "We can go anywhere, be anyone." 2 days later, my attorney called with news that sent those options spinning in new directions. He's offering a plea deal, she said. Full admission of guilt. Maximum sentence, financial restitution, in exchange for your agreement not to pursue additional civil claims. Why would he do that? The question slipped out before I could contain it. Nothing in 6 years with him had prepared me for surrender. He fought everything, everyone. Admitting fault was anathema to him. Because the evidence is overwhelming and his attorney isn't an idiot. And what? And apparently seeing everything laid out comprehensively, all the incidents compiled together rather than experienced as isolated events, has had an impact. His attorney says he's expressing genuine remorse. I made a skeptical sound. I know, she said quickly. I'm just relaying the message. Genuine or not, the plea means you wouldn't have to testify. No trial, no cross-examination, no seeing him in court. The relief that flooded me was so intense it made my knees weak. I sank onto the edge of the bed. I'd like that. I thought you might. There's a hearing scheduled for tomorrow. If you want, we can arrange for you to observe remotely. Did I want to watch him admit his crimes? To see him stripped of his carefully maintained facade? To witness the public accounting of what he had done to me behind closed doors? Yes, I said. I want to see it. The next morning found me in my attorney's satellite office in this anonymous city, watching a live stream of the hearing. The courtroom was packed. Media, observers, probably law students there to watch a high-profile case unfold. He sat at the defendant's table, diminished somehow in standard clothing rather than his usual expensive suits. The proceedings moved with formal efficiency. Charges read, rights explained. The judge's inquiry, "How do you plead?" His voice when it came was so quiet the judge asked him to speak up. "Guilty, Your Honor." 2 words. 6 letters. An admission that validated 6 years of gaslighting, of being told I was overreacting, imagining things, causing my own injuries, deserving what happened to me. The judge asked if he understood he was admitting to multiple felony counts. If he was doing so voluntarily, if he accepted the agreed-upon sentence. "Yes, Your Honor," each time. The voice of a man I no longer recognized. Then came the part I hadn't expected. The judge asked if he wished to make a statement before sentencing. He stood slowly, unsteadily, cleared his throat, adjusted glasses I'd never seen him wear before, and began to read from a paper that trembled visibly in his hands. I stand before this court fully accepting responsibility for my actions. For years, I inflicted physical, emotional, and psychological abuse on my wife. I manipulated, isolated, and terrorized her. I convinced her and others that she was at fault. I created an environment of fear and control that no person should ever have to endure. My breath caught. These weren't the words of a defense attorney. This was something else. I will not insult the court or my wife by offering excuses. There are none. What I did was inexcusable and unforgivable. I accept the maximum penalty under the law, understanding that no sentence can truly compensate for the suffering I caused. He paused, seeming to struggle for composure. To my wife, who I know may be listening, I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I can only say that I will use every day of my incarceration to understand and address the broken parts of myself that allowed me to hurt the person I should have cherished most. I am profoundly sorry. He folded the paper carefully and sat down. I realized I was crying only when my attorney silently passed me a tissue. The tears weren't of sadness or relief or even vindication. They were something more complex, grief for the relationship that could have been, for the years lost, for the person I might have become without the shadow of abuse. The judge sentenced him to the maximum term, financial restitution to be determined, no contact orders extending beyond his release, his assets frozen pending civil agreements, a comprehensive list of consequences that would fundamentally alter his life, just as he had altered mine. When the live stream ended, I sat in silence, trying to process what I had just witnessed. Was his remorse genuine? Did it matter? Nothing he said or felt could undo what had been done. No apology could erase the scars, visible and invisible. What happens now? I asked my attorney. She closed her laptop and regarded me thoughtfully. Legally, the criminal case is effectively concluded. We'll work on the civil settlement. After that, you're free to move forward however you choose. However I choose. The phrase hung in the air between us, weighted with possibility. And what about? I gestured vaguely at the monitor where his confession had played moments before. His statement? She shrugged slightly. Take from it what serves you. Leave the rest. It doesn't change the facts or the outcome. I nodded slowly. She was right. His remorse, real or strategic, wasn't mine to carry. I had carried enough of his emotional baggage for years. No more. As I left the office, stepping into afternoon sunshine that felt symbolic in its brightness, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge what had happened. I had escaped. I had exposed him. I had secured justice not just for myself, but for the child I now carried. I had transformed from victim to architect of my own liberation. The abuse had not defined me. The escape had not defined me. Even the revenge, meticulously planned and executed, would not define me. What defined me now was the future stretching before me, a future I had fought for and won. I placed my hand over my stomach, feeling the barely perceptible curve that had begun to form there. "It's done," I whispered. "Now we begin." 3 months later, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment in a city he would never think to look for me. My stomach had grown enough that strangers now smiled at me on the street, that kind of automatic acknowledgement people offer to visibly pregnant women. The morning sickness had finally subsided. The nightmares came less frequently. My phone buzzed with a news alert. I almost ignored it. I had been trying to decrease my media consumption, to focus on building rather than remembering, but something compelled me to look. His face filled the screen, thinner now, prison pallor evident even in the small photograph. The headline announced he had given his first interview since sentencing, speaking from prison about domestic violence and his own path to becoming an abuser. My finger hovered over the link. Did I want to know what he was saying? Did it matter? I set the phone aside without clicking. His words no longer had power over me. His journey toward rehabilitation or deeper deception was his own to walk. My journey was here, in this new city, with this new life growing inside me, with the freedom I had painstakingly won for us both. After years of abuse, I had disappeared, then watched my ex beg on national TV. But that was only the beginning of the story. The middle had been justice. The end was this: peace, possibility, a future unburdened by fear. I rested both hands on my growing belly and smiled as the sun warmed my face. We were going to be okay.